So, on May 16th, Ghosts of Tsushima Director's Cut is coming to the PC. Now, this is a PS5 game, so it's great to see this coming to the PC, much like we saw with Ratchet & Clank 2, Spider-Man, and so on. I know some diehard PS5 fans probably aren't too happy about it, but in my view, the more places you can play a game, the better, and I say that as a PS5 owner. That being said, sometimes PC ports of console games can be a little bit iffy, so let's take a look at what's going on with the system requirements and see if we can get a sense of how this game might play out on PC. So let's dive in. First things first, let's take a minute to appreciate this system's requirement chart. Correlating the presets from very low to very high with expected average performances is very nice. It gives you a good sense of context, and context with this sort of stuff is important. So let's start off with storage. The game requires 75 gig of storage, which, by modern Call of Duty standards, isn't bad at all. But what stands out here is that for the very low preset, they still recommend an SSD, but they kind of concede that you'll be all right with a mechanical hard drive. If you're a PC gamer in 2024, you really should have your eyes on an SSD if you haven't already done so. I mean, SSD pricing isn't great at the moment, but you can still get a terabyte inside of £100. So that's either SATA or M.2. Anyway, I digress. Moving on to RAM, and it's 16 gig across the board with the exception of the very low preset. Similar to how the game would tolerate a mechanical hard drive at the very low preset, it will also tolerate 8 gig of RAM. Now, it's easy to scoff at this kind of thing and be like, who's running 8 gig on a gaming PC in 2024? And honestly, I think you'd be surprised. Go and do some PC repairs locally for a little while, and you will be amazed at what kind of systems crawl out of the woodwork and are still being used for gaming. My point really is that it's nice to see the devs accommodating this level of system. I mean, it takes work to get a game to scale across a range of systems, and they've done the work, and it's really nice. Also, one thing worth noting is that there's no mention of 32 gig of RAM, so it'll be interesting to measure this on my system once the game's released, because it does have 32 gig of RAM, and then we can maybe see if there's any situations where the game exceeds 16 gig of RAM. Although, given that this game is coming from a PS5, which is constrained by 16 gig, I can't see it being a massive issue at all. Let's take a look at the CPU requirements, and we're seeing some really modest chips at the very low preset. A 7th Gen i3, still not complaining. It's good to see that the game is going to scale across a wide range of hardware. So again, good work from the devs. Moving up to medium, and we start to see some older 6-core parts. We've got the i5 8600 and the AMD Ryzen 5 3600. I loved this 3600 chip. I never owned one. I very, very nearly did. I was about to do a build of one, and then the 5600X came out, so that's what I ended up with. But in terms of value, it was an absolute screamer of a chip. Now, pay attention to the high and very high preset. They're recommending the same CPUs, and they're not super modern, super powerful chips either. We're looking at an 11th Gen i5, that's the 11400. Now, this is also the low-end i5, because keep in mind you've got the 11600K, that's kind of like the high-end gaming i5 chip, really. And from AMD, we've got the Ryzen 5 5600, not 5600X, 5600. Now, look at the average performance predictions, and I'm not seeing any frame rates over 60 FPS. So the way I'd be looking at it is this. If you're happy with a 60 FPS experience, regardless of the resolution, much beyond an 11th Gen i5 or 5600 is kind of overkill. Higher graphics settings put way more strain on your GPU than the CPU. And we're seeing that play out here for both the high and very high settings. An aging, modest i5 Ryzen 5 here is fine. Now, that's not always the case. Some graphics settings can also hit your CPU too, but it seems that isn't the case here. Now, what if you're wanting to target something higher? Maybe 90 FPS, maybe 120. Well, that's probably when your 14th Gen i9s and your 7800X3Ds will possibly net you some extra performance. I'm curious how much more. Again, the fact that this is coming from a console makes me temper my expectations a bit, but we'll see. We'll have to see. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out when the game gets released and it's out in the wild. Moving on to the GPU, and we've got a really big spread here. At the very low preset, we've got an RX 5500 XT from AMD and a GTX 960 4GB being recommended. Note that this is the 4GB variant of the GTX 960. If memory serves, I think there was a 2GB version as well back in the day, so obviously not that one. Again, I appreciate we're talking about the very low preset here, but it's nice to see a card from 2015 still being in with a chance to run a game like this. As we move up to the medium preset, we start to see the RTX 2060 and the 5600 XT from AMD, both of which are aging fairly modest cards, but nevertheless, they should get you a 1080p 60 FPS experience. It's crazy, really. It doesn't feel like that long ago. 1080p 60 was like a god tier gaming performance, whereas now it's kind of like the minimum acceptable level of gaming experience. So if we look at the high settings, we've got the 3070 from NVIDIA and the 6800 from AMD. Note this is the 6800, not the 6800 XT. Those two are very different cards. If you think of these two cards in terms of NVIDIA 20 series performance, you're kind of at around 2080 Ti levels of performance. Pro tip, take a look at Tech Power Up. If you go into their GPU database and pick a GPU, it will show you the relative performance of all other cards in their database. Now, don't go taking this too literally because game to game things are always going to vary, but it can give you a sense of things at a glance. For example, if you're wondering what 40 series card might best compare to the 3070, you can see that the 4060 Ti really isn't that far off. I mean, the 4060 Ti might be a bit weaker, but it's there or thereabouts. As for the very high preset, you start to see the big guns being drawn out. We've got the 4080 and the 7900 XT. They say these will get you a 4K 60 experience, and given how much money they cost, I should damn well hope so. I'd be keen to see what happens with older NVIDIA 3000 series. Keep in mind, it wasn't that long ago that they were big money. I'm thinking like, 3090 Ti's, and they were kind of marketed as 4K cards. On the other end of the spectrum, at the 4000 series, be curious to see how close a card like the 4070 Ti Super could get. As while it's kind of like a lower tier card compared to the 4080, it is still running an AD103 die with 16 gigs of VRAM on a 256-bit memory bus, albeit not with as much cache as the 4080, but it'll be interesting to see. So, if you do have that card and you end up getting this game and you watch this video, leave us a comment, let us know. There are some other bits and pieces worth talking about with this game as well, given that it's coming to PC. Reading through Sony's blog post, it seems that this is going to be the first PlayStation game on the PC that will have the new PlayStation overlay. Among other things, you'll be able to see your PlayStation friends and your PlayStation trophies, meaning that while playing on PC, you can earn PlayStation trophies just like you can on console. And there'll also be full support for achievements on the Steam or Epic Store too, depending on where you buy it. So that's a nice touch and worth mentioning. Apparently, Shift and F1 is what you need to remember to get the PlayStation overlay to appear. In terms of bells and whistles, we've got DLSS 3 from NVIDIA and FSR 3 from AMD, so frame gen should be on the cards. XeSS will also be supported too. In terms of anti-aliasing, we've got DLAA from NVIDIA and FSR native AA from AMD. So even if your GPU doesn't quite match up to those that are recommended, you're going to have some extra levers to pull, I think, in terms of upscaling and frame generation, which could get you a really nice experience. While not entirely surprising, it's nice to see the PlayStation controller getting full support. If you use a wired connection between the controller and the PC, you will also get full haptics and the adaptive triggers. That's really cool. So there you have it, folks. Not long now until the game launches. I'm tempted to pick this one up. I do a ton of flight sim on my PC, and I've got a whole other YouTube channel dedicated to that. Like and subscribe. But I'm very much a PC gamer at heart, and I like to have something to play besides the Sims. So tempted to pick this one up. Let me know in the comments if you're thinking of picking this one up too, and if so, let me know what you're going to be running it on. For me, my current build is a 5800 X3D with a 4080 Super, so I'm hoping for some good results. I've got a 4K 60 TV and a 1440p high refresh rate monitor, so it'll be interesting to see what kind of FPS we can achieve in both cases there. But I'm going to leave this one here. Thank you very much for watching, folks. Take the very best care of yourselves. Like, subscribe, leave a comment, all that good YouTube stuff, and I'll see you in the next video.